debuting the Samsung Galaxy S9 for 2020. Now, the main reason I want to check out this phone again is because if you're interested in getting a new device this year, but maybe don't want to spend a ton of money, this is a phone you can get right now for a really good deal. Obviously, this was Samsung's flagship device from early 2018, and when it launched at that time, retailed for some $700 or $800. Now, just barely 2 years later, you can pick up this phone on Amazon for well under $300. I've seen some Amazon renewed listings as low as $260. So this phone is an absolute steal. And if you want to check out some of those deals, I'll leave them all listed and linked down below in the video description. So check down there so you don't miss out. Now, aside from the fact that this phone is basically 60% off now, the real question to ask is whether or not this device is even worth it in 2020. Because there's no sense in buying a phone that's been out for a while if it doesn't have the software, hardware, or specs to keep up nowadays. And there's no sense in keeping it either if it's fallen off significantly in just 2 years. But with the S9, I think it absolutely can keep up. And even more than that, it still packs just about everything that makes it a great buy, even in 2020. If you're thinking about buying one, you absolutely should. And if you want to keep it, this is a phone that I think still has at least another year or two of life left in it. Physically, this is a device that's held up really well. It's no secret that Samsung hasn't changed up the look or materials on their flagship devices for quite some time now, so even though this phone is a bit older, you can't exactly tell just by looking at it. It's an all-glass and metal build like any other flagship phone, and you're getting the same high-quality materials and premium look and feel that you get spending more than $1,000 on some other phones. Side by side with anything else released this year, I don't think most people would be able to tell that this phone is significantly less expensive. Taking a look around, the S9 has that subtle curve on the edge of the display that sort of makes it look like it flows off the sides. This is a design element that we actually don't even get anymore, with most of Samsung's phones opting for a totally flat front glass. Paired with the tapered sides, the edges of the phone feel incredibly thin in the hand, and overall give the phone a nice feel, especially when you want to use it one-handed. And personally, I do prefer this device over the S9 Plus strictly because it is such a nice balance of size with still a large enough display. Around back, you'll also notice that we get a rear-mounted fingerprint sensor, and I have to say, if the choice is between this or a fancy new in-display fingerprint reader, I prefer something like this instead. It's easy to feel for and find, relatively quick and accurate, and plenty secure. While there are other options to unlock this phone with the iris scanner or facial recognition, a plain old fingerprint reader is something I take for granted. I think Samsung had the setup pretty much perfect on this phone. And by the way, this device is also IP68 water and dust resistant too, which is great. That pretty much is the standard we have even on 2020 flagship phones. So if you're worried about an accidental drop in a sink or something, this one can absolutely handle it. The S9 packs a 5.8-inch screen, which is still pretty good even by today's standards. And really the only thing that I think gives this phone's age away are the sizable bezels that frame the display. The top and bottom borders don't look nearly as nice as the Infinity O cutout and nearly frameless design we get on today's smartphones, but at the same time, the even design and lack of any notch, I think, still make the phone look good and very modern. Sure, we aren't pushing the boundaries on screen-to-body ratio, but realistically, this is still a phone with slim bezels and a compact form factor, housing a big screen with not much else distracting you from the viewing experience. And that viewing experience is one of the main reasons why I think this phone is still well worth it. The S9 packs a Super AMOLED panel at a maximum resolution of 2960 by 1440, cramming in a whopping 529 pixels per inch. That's pretty good, even by today's standards. And let's just say that maybe you were considering some other brand new $300 or $400 device, you likely would only be getting a 1080p display anyway. So by comparison, this flagship screen from 2 years ago is still likely better than some of the displays on new smartphones you might buy today. The S9 is bold, bright, and while it may be a little oversaturated, I think the brightness and detail paired with HDR10 support all yield an excellent viewing experience overall. And while yes, the display technology has changed year over year, I think the difference is so slight that saving hundreds of dollars going with this option makes more sense instead of spending so much extra money to get a marginally better experience. Powering this S9 is a Qualcomm Snapdragon 8 chipset, Adreno 630 GPU, and 4 GB of RAM. Now I think the 845 is still a very capable processor overall, especially if what you're doing is using media apps, browsing the web, watching YouTube videos, or other content, or playing the vast majority of mobile games too. The only real limitation I see is with the 4 GB of RAM, which isn't a whole lot. So graphics heavy games will always run as smoothly, especially when you have a running out settings. But realistically, all the games that I tried playing, including Asphalt 9, Real Racing, Call of Duty Mobile, and a few others, all run perfectly fine with the current settings. And I didn't feel like they were really clunky or the phone was performing poorly. And while you are enjoying your content, you get to experience that dual speaker stereo sound, which is great. Even a lot of phones you can buy today are still only offering the single downward firing speaker. So having stereo sound with an additional speaker and earpiece is a nice addition. And if you want to listen to your content quietly, you've still got a headphone jack at the bottom as well, which is great. I will say that on the software side of things, this phone just received the Android 10 update with Samsung's One UI 2. And that fresh new software experience improves things quite a bit. Android 10, I think, is well optimized, and One UI 2 loses a lot of the clunky extras a lot of people weren't a fan of. While it's still all a very Samsung-esque look and feel, you get a relatively fast and smooth experience from an older device, which until recently hasn't exactly been the case on the Android side of things. More than anything though, I think this shows Samsung's commitment to keeping these older devices supported, and I suspect we'll have another year of security updates on this, which is great. Realistically, this is the oldest Samsung flagship phone that'll get Android 10 anyway. So if you're thinking about any older Samsung phone at all, the S9 is about as far back as you should go, and Android 10 is what you're looking for. And by the way, while the S9 does come in an Exynos variant with a 9810 and Mali G7 GPU, if you have the option, I'd recommend just going with the Snapdragon phone instead. A lot of folks have claimed that the Exynos is good for phone as well, and it's subject to overheating a bit. So if you have the option, you might try and avoid that if you can. Now, while I can live with 4 GB of RAM, the only other thing that I have a particularly hard time getting over with this phone is the 3000 mAh battery. It's just not a whole lot, and unfortunately, even under light usage, this is a phone that has a hard time making it through the day. If you have the option to use quick charge 2.0 or Samsung's 15-watt fast charging wall plug, it shoots up 50% in about 40 minutes. Compared with a nice wireless charger, which this phone supports, you've got a lot of options to keep you powered up. But if this phone has but one fairly significant drawback, it is with that battery life. Just be prepared to charge it up before the day is out, and if you can live with that, or maybe find yourself plugged in anyway with any other phone, then I guess it's not a huge deal. So in regards to the camera, back when this phone first came out in 2018, smartphones weren't really competing yet with who could cram the most lenses on a single device. We were mostly working with 1 or 2 lenses max on all the major brands, and we get a single lens setup on the S9 here, while the S9 Plus was the phone that got an additional secondary telephoto lens. Still though, at the time, the S9's single 12 megapixel variable aperture lens could do a lot. It offered dual pixel phase detection autofocus, optical image stabilization, auto HDR, and it could even shoot 4K video at 60 frames per second. And up front, the 8 megapixel f1.7 aperture selfie camera wasn't too bad either. You also have all the shooting modes and features you could ask for, like night mode, live focus, and pro controls. And while yes, smartphone cameras have developed a lot over the last 2 years, probably more than any other aspect of the phone, there wasn't anything wrong with the S9 to begin with. Well, you do get that punchy, oversaturated Samsung look that was pretty standard at the time in pictures. The result was still a great photo, even by today's standards. So if you couldn't tell already, obviously I think the S9 is a great buy. This is a phone that was just updated to Android 10, so it feels just as fresh and new as any other Android device out right now. And it offers flagship hardware specs for 1/3 the price. Sure, battery life could be better, and the 4 gigs of RAM might not be enough for everyone. But if that's the case for you, then the S9 Plus is actually just as good of value, so you may as well consider that. And hey, if you have the S9 right now and feel like you're missing out by not getting an S20 or something else, just keep in mind, you've got yourself a really good phone still. And realistically, you aren't missing out on much by keeping it. If anything, you're really just saving yourself a huge chunk of money on a phone that's only marginally better than what you have now anyway. Overall, the S9 I think is a fantastic phone for 2020, and I'd absolutely recommend it. So there you go, that's everything you need to know about the Samsung Galaxy S9 and how it might stack up this year. If you are currently still using the S9, maybe let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I hope you guys did enjoy this video. Be sure to follow Tech Daily on Twitter and subscribe to the Tech Daily YouTube channel if you haven't already. I'll see you guys later.
Version of software, which really does suck, I'm not gonna lie. Hopefully Samsung will actually go and change it to like Android 11 or something, because Android 11 doesn't really seem to be that crazy of an update against all the phones that I've tested. It seems to me like that's the case, but again, I could be wrong. Now pricing wise, this thing started off this year at around, I would say about like 290, 290 in most market. Right now on Amazon they're selling for a little bit less than 280, so that's a really good sign. I guess not really. I mean, these things hit a massive depreciation the first year, and then they slowly depreciate over time, and at this point they're really not even going down that much more, which is totally okay. So kind of keep that in mind, but if you want to pick one up, I'll find the cheapest one on Amazon and link it down in the description below so you guys can get it from there and help support the channel at the same time. Now looking on the front, this thing has a 5.8-inch Super AMOLED display. It's 1440p, and honestly, I think it's a pretty good panel overall. I think it looks really good. It feels extremely good in my opinion, and honestly, like I stated before, I mean, we have the S20 and the S10 that probably has better displays. The S20 obviously has a way better display, but this one is still really good. And when I compared it even last year to my iPhone 11 Pro's panel, I was like, dude, this panel is like probably better than the iPhone 11 Pro, and it's still almost the exact same way. It's a very good looking panel. There's really not too much to hate on it, which is a really good sign. You have very little bezel on the top and bottom. It's a little bit, but it's not that big of a deal. And still the screen looks really good. Not even that much burning on the display either, which is a good sign. On the bottom, USB Type-C port as well as a headphone jack, which is awesome. And on the back, fingerprint sensor and that single camera setup. You have a micro SD card slot on this phone still too, which is really cool. And overall, it's it for an older phone, but it's definitely nothing compared to Oxygen OS or even stock Android, so I'll definitely say the update in the software really helped out a lot for this phone. I feel like they still have a long way to go, but on the Galaxy S9 I still think the software is great in my opinion. Now moving on to the performance, we have that Qualcomm Snapdragon 845 chipset, an Adreno 630 GPU, and 3 different models with 4 gigs RAM each, and the performance is still about the same on all of them as expected. It's still extremely good. There's really not too much to complain about, as I said before. Yeah, there's some things here and there that kind of rub me the wrong way, but with One UI 2, because of that new gesture UI, it just feels smoother than what it was before, which is something I really like. So because of that, it just feels smoother, and even though it might not be faster inherently, I feel like it's definitely an update, and from early on this year to now, I feel like the performance may have gotten slightly better. So not much has changed there, but because of the software, maybe some things have changed out a little bit, but still nothing too drastic. So in terms of performance, that pretty much covers it. Now hitting on the camera, this thing has a 12 megapixel camera on the back. You can do 4K at 60, which is extremely awesome, but you don't have any telephoto lenses or ultra-wide sensors, which even the budget phones of this year have that capability. So not a deal breaker, nothing like that, but still, again, at the end of the day, something to consider. So I'm not really freaking out about it too much. I still think the camera is pretty decent, but it's